Welcome to Hawaiian Humane Society's dog walking training. We'll be covering canine body language and behavior. The 6 dog walking skills that you need include number 1, understanding canine body language and behavior. That will be addressed in this webinar. Then you'll be asked to watch another webinar that is all about how to create successful animal interactions. And then during your in-person training, you'll learn 4 key skills: how to hold the leash properly, how to perform the kennel routine, how to use management tools, and then how to implement safety protocols. When I'm thinking about canine body language, I want to first portray a few concepts to you before we dive deep into what everything means. The first is, where do you listen? So, what body parts are you paying attention to gather information about what the animal is communicating? The most obvious ones are ears, eyes, face, mouth, tail, body weight, and body position. So, I want you to imagine that you're meeting a dog for the first time and you want to get to know them. What body part do you naturally gravitate towards? Is it the ears? Is it the face? Is it the tail? Pay attention to when you're greeting dogs, what body part does your eye naturally go to? Because I'm going to start to challenge you to start looking at less obvious body parts or behaviors so that we can train our eye to become more observant. So a few less obvious behavior postures or things to pay attention to include a weight shift in the dog, blinking, licking, yawning, and sniffing. We'll go into detail about what those mean. Looking or not looking, the dilation of the dog's pupils, the corners of their mouth, the posture or the tenseness of their face and or body, whether or not they have a bend in their elbow. Are they really tall or are they relaxed? What's their respiration rate? And what is the speed and direction of their movement? So again, these are all very simple places to start. And whenever I ask this question, everybody in the audience usually has a different answer, and that's totally okay. But what I want you to pay attention to is, what is my natural place? Where do I naturally go to? And then can I start to actually challenge myself and pay attention to these less obvious postures? How do I listen? How do I observe canine body language? Well, I've created this acronym that's called WHOA, which means to slow down. And it is watch. So you're watching the animal, you're gathering information, you're making objective observations. So you are stating facts. It's not subjective. It's not your thoughts or opinion. It is more about, what do you observe with your 2 eyes? I observe that the dog is jumping up and is mouthing me. I observe that the dog is tail tucked in the back of the kennel, right? So those are my objective observations. Then you could make your assessment. Your assessment of the first dog might be that this dog is overstimulated. The second assessment about the second dog would be that the dog is concerned or fearful or uncomfortable about approaching me. And then from there, we would figure out how are we going to act accordingly in order to support the animal's behavior. So this is an acronym that you're bringing with you all the time and using when you're engaging with animals, when you first meet them, but also throughout that entire engagement. Because we want to always listen. Because just because a dog is saying one thing in one context doesn't mean he's going to say the same thing in another context. Behavior changes, it's really fluid, and it changes based off of the environment. So it's really important for us to pay attention to how that dog is showing up in that particular moment in comparison to our assumptions about that animal. So behavior is fluid, it's always changing, it's changing based off of conditions, and we're part of those conditions. Now, context matters. And this can get a little bit gray in some cases, because not all specific behaviors or even positions mean the same thing. So it's not that I can say all rolling on the back to expose the belly means this, because we have 2 different dogs in this picture. The dog to the top has soft eyes, the ears are relaxed, the mouth is open, the tail is neutral, and that dog to me looks relaxed. My assessment of that dog would be relaxed. In comparison to the dog to the bottom, the dog has uh, almond-shaped eyes, the pupils look dilated, the ears are back, the mouth is closed, the paws raised up, the tail is tucked. That dog looks more uncomfortable. So this is a case where, again, not all rolling on the back to expose the belly equals a specific emotion, because these dogs are doing the same position. However, they are feeling emotionally very different. The same in this case. So the dog to our left is jumping up, but the mouth is open, the pupils are neutral, the tail is neutral, they are loose and boisterous in their movements, in comparison to the dog that's also jumping up to the right, sort of digging his claws into the handler. The ears are back, the mouth is closed, there's tension in the face, right? So it looks the dog looks more stressed to our right in comparison to the dog on the left. However, they're doing the same behavior. They're both jumping up, but the context really matters. And we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the dog's entire body, not just making one thing mean a particular emotion or feeling for that animal. And this goes along with wagging tail. So many people have a misconception that any wagging tail equals that the dog is happy. And that's not the case at all. So if the dog's tail is really high, like you see here in this position and in this position, also in this position, this dog's tail is high as well. If the tail is really tall and it's wagging really tightly, we call that a flagging tail. And that is usually that the dog is stimulated by the environment. And it could be that they're threatened by the environment. It could be that they're rising in levels of frustration. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're feeling happy. It means that they're overstimulated and their tail is reflecting that. Their tail is tight and their tail is wagging in a really swift, tight position. If a dog's tail is down and tucked, that is usually a sign that they are concerned. They could also be wagging it because they might be conflicted. They might be interested in approaching that person, but also a little bit worried about it. So again, you can't just equate wagging equals happy. So when we're looking at tails, we want to pay attention to the level at which they're carrying it. Are they carrying it above the spine really high? Are they carrying it out here, which is pretty neutral? Or are they carrying it really tucked? And how fast is that tail moving? And then how tense is that tail? Is that tail really, really tense? And if it is, that's usually the dog is pretty stimulated. Now, I talk about carriage here, and what I mean by that is that this is an Akita, and typically their tail is held very high. There are a lot of breeds where their tail is naturally already tall or high in the air, and usually what we'll see is that that curly tail gets even pushed forward more, which is what you see here. So that's that even more erect tail. So again, not all wagging equals a happy dog. We have to pay attention to the level, the speed, the carriage, and the tension of that tail. When we're talking about behavior and body language, we want to make sure that we're using objective language and that we're defining labels that we might be using. So here are a few examples of quote unquote labels that people would use. Dominant, stubborn, high energy, high arousal, pushy, aggressive, protective, right? These are labels that we might use to describe a dog. And the tricky thing about these labels is that these labels get us into trouble because we're not actually describing what we see, right? Even when we say, a dog is trying to be dominant over me, I don't know what that even looks like, right? A dog is stubborn. I don't know. Is that true? What does it mean? What does it look like? Is the dog pushy? I'm not quite sure, right? So we need to be able to define these labels and say the dog was protective. And by that, I mean he was barking and lunging from inside the house. And What's tricky about these labels is that we're also assigning the dog's intent, right? Like if I say the dog is stubborn, he doesn't want to walk back to the kennel. Is he stubborn, or is he actually trying to prevent an aversive situation, which is being in the kennel for too long, from happening? Right? We wouldn't call that dog stubborn. We'd actually call him smart, right? He wants to avoid the aversive situation the same way that we want to avoid aversive situations. So when we use labels, it can be really tricky because, again, we're assigning intent for the animal and we don't know, we didn't ask them. We don't know if dogs are trying to be dominant over us. We don't know if dogs are trying to be aggressive. What we do know is the behavior that we have observed. So it's really important for us to limit the use of the labels. And if we do use labels, just define it, right? So if I say, gosh, that dog was really fearful, or that dog was really difficult, I mean this. And then I am describing the objective observations that that I observed. So it's really important for us to not just slap a label onto a dog, because that label can get carried around with the dog throughout that stay in the shelter. And we want to be really articulate and clear about what we're observing, because all of the information that you're gathering about these animals is so critical to their support. So we want to make sure that we ask you to really define your experience and define what you mean. And all of those details are really critical in order to support these animals moving forward. So now we're going to talk about the emotional lives of dogs. How I like to talk about the emotional lives of dogs is I use something called the circumplex model of emotion. And this is created by scientists to study human behavior, but we're using it when we talk about canine behavior as well, since they have a very similar nervous system to us. They're mammals as well. So it's important for us to use this model because it creates a lot of nuance, right? Emotions don't just exist in a vacuum. And so what I love about the circumplex model is that we talk about that the animal can exist on either an activated or an overstimulated or deactivated or understimulated. So they can fall somewhere along this axis, and they can fall along this as well. They can be feeling good, feeling pleasant, or feeling unpleasant. And so if you see in this quadrant of activated and pleasant, you see labels, right? Called alert, excited, elated, happy. If you see activated and unpleasant, you'll see upset, stressed, nervous, and tense, right? Again, these are all labels. We would have to really define what nervous look like or what stress look like. But just for the sake of the circumplex model of emotion, this is all about human behavior. So for a dog, they can exist along this axis as well as this one. So let's say they're activated and they're feeling pleasant. They might fall here. Or they're really activated and they're feeling really good. They might fall along here. And then what happens is that emotions are fluid. So just because they're feeling this way in one moment doesn't mean they can't feel this way in another moment, right? So emotions are fluid. So we have an example here is, let's say we have a dog that is deactivated or low arousal and is feeling unpleasant. So it's not feeling great. So what we're observing is that the dog is looking away, the ears are back, and the head is low. But then in the same moment, I decide to toss treats. I start blinking. I move my body away. I create space for the dog to approach me. And now the dog is engaging in approaching behaviors where their tail is low, but slightly wagging. So they're wanting to approach. So maybe something about my engagement has created pleasant conditions so that the dog's feeling pleasant enough to approach. But he's oscillating back and forth between, like, I'm not quite sure about this girl, and I kind of want to approach her, but I'm also not sure, right? So the dog in this very moment is, what I would say, the label I would use for this is conflicted, right? They are socially, they have a social desire to check me out, but they're also a little bit concerned about it, right? It could be about the environment. It could be about me, it could be about both, right? But this dog is conflicted. And I give this example to show you that dogs can experience multiple emotions at once, the same way that we can experience multiple emotions at once, right? I can be excited and also nervous to present, right? I can hold two emotions at one time. And so this is why it's tricky when we like just label a dog one way, is because their behavior and their emotions, all of that is fluid and it's changing based off of the conditions. Now, another example I like to talk about is that we could have, like I said earlier, the same behaviors, but they mean different emotions. So remember I was talking about with the images, we had dogs rolled on their back to expose their belly. One was feeling really relaxed, one was feeling not comfortable, right? And so it's the same thing. So we see a lot of times where, especially with dogs that are in the shelter, sometimes they can be jumping up and pulling, and they can be feeling really excited or happy, and they tend to recover quickly and stop jumping, in comparison to the dog that's jumping up, jumping on the handler, darting at the end of the leash, maybe mouthing, right? So they're doing the same behaviors of jumping up and pulling, but one dog is feeling pleasant while doing this behavior, and another dog is feeling unpleasant while doing this behavior. So again, we have to be paying attention to the context and all of the body postures and all of the behaviors that are happening to really try to understand what the underlying emotion is for that animal. So when an animal is feeling threatened and their amygdala is fired, they have four behavior choices that they could make. They can fight, they can act confrontationally, they can flee, they can leave the situation, they can freeze or shut down, or they can what we call fool around. And lots of times, fool around is often misinterpreted as excitement or play. And so, we're going to watch a video next so that you can see what fool around actually looks like, because this is important for us to be able to pay attention to in the shelter. Fighting and fleeing and freezing are relatively easy to see, but fool around, like I said, is often misinterpreted. This video indicates a dog saying no when I am trying to reach to clip her nails. These behaviors are often misinterpreted as play or excitement, especially because her tail is wagging. This is my stepdaughter's dog that I have a relationship with, which is why I pushed her slightly over threshold to capture this video. She engages in a bunch of what we call fool around behaviors, and again, like I mentioned, often misinterpreted as play. We did a lot of repair work after this video to make sure she was feeling better about the clippers and me. Let's watch her in slow motion. I grab the clippers. She sits, does a lip lick. I present the clippers. She's watching me, and then she moves away and almost mouths my hand. Her tail is moving quickly. She freezes a bit, removes herself from the situation, so some avoidance, but still engages with me, which I think is part of the reason why people get confused. She moves away again. Mouth is closed, little lip lick, which is a displacement behavior, moves away again. But it looks playful. She mouths my hand to let me know, stop, I don't want this, I don't want this. She does it again and constantly removes herself from me, and then she rolls on her side to offer an appeasement gesture. In the Fear-Free Shelter course, you went over a lot of the basics of canine body language. And so in this course, we're going to go over some more detailed information. So we're going to look at it through the lens of the circumplex model of emotion. So I'm talking about high arousal, positive valence. So high arousal is the dog is overstimulated, but they are feeling good. They are not stressed. So it would fall in this area. This is often referred to as the label that folks would use would be high energy or excited. Arousal is the state of being that occurs when strong emotions are evoked by fear, anger, and notice that I bolded stress, excitement, or joy, right? So we're talking about the moments when the dog is overstimulated and feeling good about what's going on. What this can often look like is that there's a curvature in the dog's spine. They're not rigid, they're not tense. Their mouth is usually open, but their face is really relaxed. There's no tension or stress lines on the dog's face. The pupils may or may not be slightly dilated. They might have neutral ears, so they're not pricked forward or they're not plastered back. They're in their neutral position. And the tail is also neutral, or it could be perked up just slightly or raised slightly. They could be jumping up, they could be pulling, and there could be some light pressure that is mouthing, but all of these behaviors have a pretty quick recovery. And what I mean by that is that they don't stay persistent. They don't have a lot of intensity behind them. So they're jumping up and then they lean into petting, or they're jumping up and then you ask them to do something different, like ask them to sit, and then they can actually perform that behavior. They're not in this place of stress where they can't listen or change their behavioral repertoire, right? So this is very different in comparison to dogs that are high arousal, negative valence. So they're not feeling great. And this is a lot of what you see in the shelter. And this often gets misinterpreted as the dog is excited when in actuality, they're very stressed. And so when we think about this, it's falling somewhere along this quadrant of the circumplex model of emotion. They're activated and they're not feeling great. And this is often referred to the labels that we use as stress or high arousal. You might hear that term in the shelter, or frustration. And so remember, this is the definition of arousal. It's a state of being that occurs when strong emotions are evoked. And here I have bolded fear, anger, and stress. So I want you to pay attention to some of the body postures that are on this list. They are also on the other list that I just shared with you. For example, mouthing, jumping up, pulling, those are all on that same list of the positive valence. So I want you to pay attention to the differences between this list, even though there are similar behaviors, such as mouthing, jumping up, and pulling. And so remember, in the beginning of this webinar, we talked about that behaviors can exist and they can mean different emotions, right? So this is why it's so important for you to look at the entire dog's body and the context of the situation. So often when we see a dog that is overstimulated, so high arousal, negative valence, so not feeling great about the environment or the situation, we see mouthing, we see jumping up, we see pulling, we can see mounting the person or something else, almost as if they're wrapping, and they're pretty fixated about it. You can see them darting from one end of the leash to the other. They have a lack of focus. They have repetition of behavior. So they might be mouthing and jumping up in a very repetitive way. It's hard to interrupt them. They're having a hard time settling or recovering. We can also see them what's called like popping off the handler. So they're jumping on the handler, but then jumping away. So it's not jumping up to seek attention. It's almost jumping up to release some of the charge, some of the stimulation that's in their body. And it's not necessarily a social behavior. So we don't want to necessarily engage with dogs when they're doing that. It is that they're stressed. So this is where in the next webinar, we're going to talk a lot about how to create successful animal interactions. And lots of times when dogs are displaying these types of behaviors, we really don't want to add tactile touch and physical touch to their body, because it can create more stimulation. It can create additional mouthing, additional jumping up. So we want to be really careful about using our management tools that you'll learn in the in-person course in order to support the dog instead. So you'll see alert and tense body posture, and that's different than what I said in positive valence, where you see the curvature in the spine, you see loose body postures. You might see that the pupils are really dilated. There's stress lines in the face. You can see that right here. Pupils are dilated here. The commissures in the corners of the mouth are pulled really back, maybe because the dog is panting. The dog might be taking treats harder. So normally they have a really soft mouth, but now they're really sharking at you, or they're not taking food at all because they're just too stimulated by the environment. And again, like I mentioned, that we have a really hard time redirecting or refocusing these dogs. And lots of times we need to take them out of the current environment. So whether that's in the kennel situation, or whether that's walking through the kennels, or whether that is moving away from a distraction on a walk, it's just they're communicating to us that they're having a hard time, and it's displayed in these suite of behaviors. And it doesn't have to have all of these behaviors, right? These are just examples of what we can see from a lot of shelter dogs, that because they're stressed, they're overstimulated, they're not feeling great, we can see this suite of behaviors. So we can also see threat displays, and these are ways that dogs communicate to us and to one another that they're not feeling great. So we can see this often in this part of the circumplex model of emotion. And what is really threatening to other dogs, and if we do it to them, is direct eye contact. So notice in this picture, these dogs are staring at one another. They are very frontal with one another, meaning that their faces are towards one another. Their mouths are closed, their ears are perked forward, their body is really tense. So this is a threatening posture. This is why when we directly stare at dogs, or we approach them in a direct straight line, or we move quickly towards their face, a lot of that can be perceived as threatening, considering that if another dog did that to another dog, it would be perceived as threatening. So threat displays, or what we call distance increasing behaviors, they function to say, hey, I don't like that. I'm having a really hard time with whatever it is that you're doing, and I don't like that. So these behaviors can include direct eye contact, head whipping. So let's say I'm petting a dog, and all of a sudden I get to a spot that's maybe tender and I'm not aware of that. And the dog whips their head really quickly towards my hand. They might lick my hand, they might mouth my hand. And all of that is to say, like, stop doing what you're doing. Very similar to what you saw with the video when I'm presenting the nail clippers to the dog. She very much moved her head towards my hand several times to say, like, what are you doing? And please stop. Muzzle punching. This is where the dog uses their nose to move it towards a part of your body to basically say, I need space from you. It is usually accompanied with a really tense body. We were talking about popping off or body slamming. Again, this can also be saying, I want space from you, and I'm going to use my body to let you know that I don't want you to approach me. So jumping on you or popping off you, again, probably accompanied with a suite of behaviors that we saw in previous slides where they are stressed. Agonistic pucker, where the lips and the mouth are puckered forward, basically saying, please stop. A lip lift, growl, snarl, bark, lunge, snap, bite. This, we already talked about commissure. Again, this is that the corners of the mouth. You'll see here there is a C shape. And this is more of a threatening mouth posture, but we can also see that this dog is really concerned not just by the C shape in the mouth, but also by the direct stare. Body weight is forward, ears are perked forward, the tail is super high, right? It could even be flagging, like waving pretty quickly. So this dog is communicating to whatever is in the environment that he is not comfortable. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ladder of aggression. And this is something that Dr. Jill Sackman had created. And it's talking about how dogs have a variety of choices. Like we just talked about that list of threat displays. They have a variety of choices to communicate to whomever in the environment that they're uncomfortable. And you'll see here, the ladder of aggression starts in green, goes to yellow, orange, and then red. So the ladder of aggression includes blinking, yawning, licking nose. These are all displacement behaviors that we're going to talk about. So these behaviors serve to help the dog cope with the stressful environment. The dog might look away to avoid any perceived conflict. They might walk away to avoid. They might creep away with their ears back really slowly to get out of the situation. They might stand in position with their tail tucked. They might stiffen and stare. They might growl, snap, or bite. Right. So they have a variety of choices, and not all choices are listed on the ladder of aggression. But the ladder of aggression is to basically communicate that, again, they have a variety of choices, and some dogs will always just choose the first three, right? No matter what the context is, they will always try to get out of the situation instead of escalating to really challenging or more threatening behavior choices. Whereas some dogs, they might actually skip a few steps. They might engage in some displacement behaviors, stiffen pretty quickly, and then escalate to biting very quickly, right? So we're not sure what our dog's thresholds are. We're not sure what their behavior or learning history is when it comes to communicating to other dogs and other people. So we want to make an assumption about shelter dogs that they can escalate quickly and that they can bite. And this is not to scare anyone. This is more for us to be really safe and to be observing the dogs that are in front of us, regardless if we've developed that relationship with them. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to who they are in that moment, and know that, remember, behavior is based on the conditions in the environment, both externally, what's going on around the animal, and both internally. For example, let's say the dog recently had surgery and is having a hard time recovering physically, right? So if they have some pain, they might escalate more quickly. So it's important for us to understand that all dogs are different in how they're going to communicate, especially when we have dogs with a learning history where, if it wasn't safe for them to display these types of behaviors, let's say they were punished either by another dog or a person, let's say they were yelled at or something like that when these behaviors happen, it doesn't help the dog feel any better about the context. So they still feel internally uncomfortable. And then when that context or those conditions happen again, in their minds, they go, gosh, I don't have access to these choices since that gets me in trouble. I'm going to escalate to biting. Right. So we don't know what the shelter dog's learning history is. So we want to make sure that we are always have the mindset to be proactively cautious and proactively reading the dog in front of us. The next set of behaviors are conflict reduction behaviors, and they can exist somewhere along here on the circumplex model of emotion. So I mentioned early in the ladder of aggression that there is the head turn or the look away. It's known as a calming signal, and it's usually to signify like, hey, I'm not a threat, but I need some distance from you. So I love to see when dogs communicate this to other dogs. They're basically saying like, gosh, I don't love what's going on here, and I'm just going to avoid any perceived conflict. But when dogs are doing that, either to you or to another dog, if that other dog or you are not listening to them, that's when they could choose to escalate. Because in their mind, they're going, gosh, I've communicated clearly that I don't want you to lean over me anymore. I don't want you to snap the harness in that way. I don't want you to, have this person continuously say hello to me. So this is really important to pay attention to because it's an early warning sign to say, yeah, I'm not really comfortable with what's going on. And so you see in the photo to the left, the person is looming over with the camera. The dog is looking away, mouth is closed, stance is backwards, almost looking like he wants to leave, and ears are back. This dog is approaching this dog, and he's approaching using his face and moving towards the face, which is a little bit more threatening than going towards the rear. And if we notice that this dog's mouth is closed, they're looking away, the tail is low, almost avoiding the interaction. Displacement behaviors, we talked briefly about them a moment ago, but what they do is they function to help the dog cope with their environment. So they're behaviors that happen out of context that let us know, gosh, this dog's having a really hard time. So it's not that, let's say I spill a couple of treats on the ground and the dog starts sniffing to get those treats. That's not a displacement behavior. What I mean is, let's say I approach the dog's kennel really quickly and I'm fumbling around and drop my phone, and the dog is watching me and then all of a sudden starts sniffing the ground and moving away. That is a displacement behavior. Like, wow, this person is coming into my space pretty quickly, making a loud noise. This is a little bit scary for me, so I'm going to avoid and sniff. So we have the 5 S's: sniffing, scratching, shaking off, sneezing, stretching, and then we have lip licking and yawning. And again, these behaviors are not happening when the dog is tired, or if I just gave this dog a bath, or if I'm holding roast beef in front of this dog. It's happening out of context, and once you see this, you'll never not see it again. And you'll see shelter dogs exhibiting these behaviors all the time. The one behavior that I think is really important to pay attention to and also reinforce using food is a shake off. So for example, if I'm walking a shelter dog and my shelter dog gets really, really tall, they're on their tippy toes, their body gets really tense, their mouth is closed, and they're focusing on, let's say, a chicken or another dog, and you use some of your management tools to step behind a car and break their focus. If they do a shake off right after that, that's a really good sign because they are relieving some of that stress that they had just created in their body. So I like to reinforce some of these coping behaviors because they're great choices, right? That dog could choose a different path, which would be remain stiff and charged the entire walk, so that by the time the next thing presents in the environment, the next trigger, the next distraction, then that dog might escalate to barking or lunging, right? So if we see them do shake offs, it does really help them relieve some of that stress and anxiety. Avoidance behaviors often get missed, especially by people. Sometimes by dogs, other dogs are really good at reading this. Sometimes they're not. But avoidance behaviors are not your obvious, overt growling, barking, and lunging, right? Like a lot of people know to stay away from those behaviors. Most people miss avoidance. So I want you to pay attention to when a dog is avoiding you or avoiding approaching someone or avoiding a particular situation, like walking in a part of the shelter. So they might have their eyes averted, turning away, walking away. They might be staying in one position, hiding, or just gazing off, like they're just almost like they're ignoring you, right? And so this should be observed and noted, and we should not try to push these dogs into whatever it is that we want them to do. If we need to move them out of this situation from a safety perspective, like another dog is coming or something like that, go ahead and prompt the dog using your management tools that you'll use. However, if we can give them some time to process the environment, if it's safe to do so, meaning there are not a lot of distractions, that would be better. Even if it's just like sometimes I'll wait just 5 to 10 seconds, and then the dog makes the choice on their own to move with me or move towards whatever it is that I want them to walk towards. But they're in control. I'm offering them the choice to do that instead of sort of making them do that or putting any social pressure on them. And you'll learn a lot more about that in the next webinar. Appeasement behaviors, they function to basically say, hey, I come in peace. I'm perceiving this as threatening, and I don't want any sort of threatening interaction with you. So appeasement behaviors could look like looking away, slow movements. They might be avoiding eye contact and softly blinking. They might be lying on the back to expose the belly, paw raises, lip retraction, or what we call submissive grin. Most of the time, you'll see this on YouTube or TikTok where it's like the dog is smiling and people laugh at it, but honestly, the dog's really uncomfortable. So it's not necessarily funny, right? So it's often misinterpreted as that the dog is smiling when the dog is actually truly uncomfortable. They might submissively urinate, and they might lick a dog or person's face pretty excessively. So here's that submissive grin. The ears are back, body weight is back, tail is kind of low. And then here's that dog again, where we've got the ears are back, The eyes are soft, probably blinking, mouth is closed. We have a little bit of a paw raise here, and then tight tail. This video includes great examples of appeasement, displacement, and avoidance behaviors. We'll watch the clip and then review each dog in slow motion. As a reminder, appeasement behaviors function to cut off any perceived threat. Given some of the face-to-face greetings, slight tension, and this being the dog's initial greeting, I'm not surprised there were appeasement gestures made. The tan dog now clearly does not want to engage with the white and tan dog as she removes herself from the situation. This appears to cause the white and tan dog some stress as she engages in displacement behaviors to soothe her nervous system. These include sneezing and stretching. So in the slow motion video, we're going to focus on dog A on the left. You can see her lip licking. You can see her approaching with her body crouched. She goes nose to nose and is sniffing the other dog's face. She's a low tail wag and she lip licks again. Her paw is lifted as an appeasement gesture while she sniffs the other dog's face. Because she is sniffing nose to nose with that other dog, that causes the other dog to retreat from the situation and remove herself. Now we'll look at the dog on the right. She's comfortable enough to get a sniff from behind while the other dog is turned away, but the moment the white and tan dog is face to face, that's when she becomes more uncomfortable, where she does a look away, she has her paw raised, her body is tense, her tail is high, and she decides to leave the situation in order to diffuse any sort of conflict. One of the dogs is conflicted by the intercanine interaction and engages in what looks like excitement behaviors, such as running around and jumping up. If you notice, he continues to solicit attention by jumping on the handlers while intermittently watching the other puppies zoom around the play yard. Given that his body appears to be tense with his mouth closed and he's displaying some avoidance and displacement behaviors, I might assume that this dog is feeling a bit conflicted or anxious about the other dog, and that is why he's jumping up and scratching. Again, anxiety can often be misinterpreted as excitement. Let's watch dog A in slow motion. He's jumping up on the handler and avoiding the other dog. Runs up and jumps on the handler again. He's removing himself from the other dog. Paw raise, tension, staring, mouth closed, the tail is high. Slight stress lines in his face as he opens up his mouth to pant. You'll see tension around his eyes. Again, he's popping off the handlers. Paw raise when he looks at the other dog. Now the other dog is running and he jumps at the handler. And then he engages in a scratch, which is a displacement behavior, continuously avoiding the other dog. Measuring an animal's fear, anxiety, and stress throughout their time in the shelter is really critical to their quality of life. And you learn this in your fear-free shelter course. This is just an image of the scale from 0 stress to number 5, that's highest stress. We're going to watch a video to show you what 1 through 5 actually looks like. During this video, we're going to observe dog behavior and score the animal's FAS, fear, anxiety, and stress, using the FAS scale. The goal is to improve your observation skills, monitor an animal's FAS, and provide support and intervention to address their emotional well-being. This animal's FAS score has elements of score 1 and score 2. So the correct score would be FAS2. Observations include oscillating between looking at the person and looking away, ears slightly back and perking up, fidgeting slightly at the front of the kennel, a tighter tail wag, the mouth is open, and the commissures or the corners of the mouth are pulled back with slight stress lines in the face. This animal's FAS score is 2. Observations include ears are back, mouth is closed, lip licking, stress lines in the face, the body is slightly crouched, the dog has soft eyes, and she's oscillating between looking at the person and looking away. She lip licks several more times, which is a coping behavior. There's moderate pupil dilation. She's at the front of the kennel and licks the person's hand when they engage. This animal's FAS score has elements of score 3 and score 4, so the correct score would be FAS 4. Observations include ears are back, full pupil dilation. The dog is looking at the person with head low, looking away as the camera gets closer. The head continues to be low and the body is crouched. They maintain the position within the kennel. They are lip licking, which is a coping behavior. There is a tight tail wag to the right, hanging low. She perks up to the neighboring dog and looks as though she's getting ready to bark. This animal's FAS score also has elements of score 3 and score 4, so the correct score would be FAS 4. Observations include the ears are back, full pupil dilation. They are watching the person while moving away very slowly. The weight is back and the body is low. The head is also low and the body is crouched. The tail is tucked and the mouth is closed. This animal's FAS score is 5. Observations include the dog is at the front of the kennel, persistently barking, the commissures of the mouth are pulled forward, the tail is tightly wagging and appears to be stiff, pupils are very dilated, the dog jumps on the kennel while lip licking and persistently barking. This animal's FAS score is 5. Observations include that the ears are back, the dog is barking and growling at the front of the kennel, the commissures of the mouth are pulled forward, pupils are dilated, there is an agonistic pucker as the person steps closer with additional growling and snarling, and the tail is tightly wagging and very tense. So thank you. That wraps up our webinar on canine body language and behavior. We'll see you in the next webinar where you create successful animal interactions.